Today, we get to unpack this topic of what it means to be inhabited by the Spirit, which we're going to be reading out of the Word in just a second. But I just want to share that, thinking about inhabiting, I was reminded as I was rehearsing this sermon that I think it's in 2 days. 2 days will be 10 years since I first moved out of my mum's house. It's like 10 years, and that's when I first started pastoral ministry. So I was called by God out to Mergen, and the Mergen church joined with me in following what God's call was for us, and they blessed me in a huge way during that time. But in the lead up to that, I had to actually go through the experience of uprooting where I inhabited. This is an image of my room, of my room back then. And I want to just quickly explain, the image on the left is partway through packing. It didn't always look like that. So only partway through packing did I realize, I should actually take a picture of this moment because I'm never going to live here again. I was partway through, and then I took the image on the right, and I want to also be clear, I did take the TV with me. But it was that moment where I really realized what it looked like, the difference between presence and absence, inhabiting and no longer inhabiting. Because for as long as we owned that home, that was my room. And then it was that realization that the difference of what it looks like when presence is there and when there is no longer presence, when there's that absence. And I grappled with that for the first time as I was leaving home and going into this new experience of life. That, this room used to scream me. You look at this room that's Adam's room. Everything about it says it's Adam's room. Everything in it is Adam's room. And then when I left, it was no longer Adam's room. It was now going to point to something else. Either it was going to point to an absence or it was going to point to something else. Now, today, it's a guest room that I use occasionally. So technically, I still get to sleep in that room on occasion. But it can never be my room again. It's different. I think about, I want to keep drawing this out in a different way, as we read through this verse. Ephesians 3:16 is what we're reading. And the verse says, I pray that out of his glorious riches he may strengthen you with power through his Spirit in your inner being. Now, that's actually incredibly monumental. And I use that word intentionally. Because for the Spirit to dwell within me means a couple of things. We're talking about God's presence in me. I represent God to some extent because he is in me. So I'm like the previous image, my room, I am the room in this equation, and everything inside of it should be representing God. And so should indicate God in me and his power, everything, his glorious riches. Can you imagine what a statue or monument looks at the first moment of its creation and how it points to its purpose, what it represents? Let's look at a few examples. Did you know that the Statue of Liberty was made out of copper and that it actually had a totally different sheen and color than it does now? With time, I forget that this is a fact. With time, it ages. Jenna actually knows the scientific name for it, so I don't know. She told me and I forgot. But basically, with time, it changed. And the only way to have stopped that, most likely, is to probably expend a lot of effort, a lot of intentionality, a lot of resources, a lot of time, that they most likely went, probably not worth it. I can see that the flame part of it is still its original color. So maybe they just went, we don't want to keep that part original. But the rest of it, maybe not so much. That monument points to this symbolism of equality and freedom, your poor and huddled masses. But it is no longer the glimmering, shimmering image of its original composition. And then it's beyond that, the Eiffel Tower originally was red. That's one I also didn't know. I see a couple Godsmack faces in the room. Did you know that? With time, its image begins to change as it dwells within the world, just like we do. Because, this image, the Eiffel Tower, is supposed to represent the pride and prestige of a nation, a people, France, Paris in particular. But it too also weathers with time. As it dwells more and more in the world, the only way for it to remain its original image is, again, to invest much more deeply. And then the pyramids. Many of us might be aware of this, but the original pyramids would have shimmered in the desert as the light catched it. It had this sort of golden capstone at the top that would catch the light as you looked at it. It would shine in your face. It was almost like a mirror. But obviously, it's been around a very long time. And to restore it to its original image would probably cost more than the economy of Egypt can afford. But there we go. As time goes on, each of these tends to lose the original glimmer of the glory that it pointed to. And pyramids, who knows why they built it? That's debated. But it, in many ways to us, represents the mystery of ancient times and represents the power and wealth of pharaohs of ancient times as well. And then we get to this monument, the temple of God. Now, the temple of God, as we see it there, no longer exists. The temple of God is now elsewhere in a very big way. But the temple of God was unique in the sense that it was meant to point to God when God said, "This is the place in which I will have my presence among you." So everything about this temple is to point to the fact that I dwell in this place and dwell among you. So the temple was actually made so particularly, like it's actually some of the hardest reading I've ever had in the Bible. Because God is so precise in the measurements that he wanted for the temple and the exact things that he wanted done in the temple, because he goes, this is the place in which I'm living. It's my room, so it's going to be the way I want it to be, because everything about this place should scream me. But the thing is, just like those previous monuments, it kind of faded with time. Like, this temple was eventually destroyed, but even before that, it actually at times lost sense of its purpose. It lost sense of whose presence dwelt within it. As even though they carried on many of rituals over and over, day in, day out. Like I was just reading in the book of Ezekiel the other day, where they used to describe that in the morning they would start the day with a sacrifice and you would see the smoke rising from the temple. And I thought, imagine you're a guy going to work in Jerusalem, and every morning you would see that temple and the little smoke would come up in the morning, and you'd be reminded that the worship of God continues day in, day out. And you'd know that the temple is doing its thing. You'd be reminded, yeah, that's right, because why is the temple doing that? Because every day a sacrifice is given to God. Just because it's what God is due. It's because it's his house. But it lost sight of its purpose at times. And the reason why I point to is Jesus' own words, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. We desire far more than what we are, but our flesh is tempted by things of this world. Just like the longer we're present in this world and more that the world becomes a determining factor of what we are, what we look like, what we point to, we fade, much like those other monuments. Our original glimmer starts to wear off. Even the temple of God, even if it looked pristine, it had become misguided. It lost sense of it no longer pointed to what it should point to. Like, in the Spirit, if we live as ones in whom the Spirit dwells within, as the Scripture tells us, we become reconciled to God, like this image of God over us. We are now, God now with us. We are now reconciled with God. We are reconciled with each other humans, other people, and we are also reconciled to his creation as we are meant to be, as we desire to be, as it is meant to be. All these things that are possible in something that is beyond what it currently is, but the flesh is weak, and we often find ourselves carrying this big, bulky, awkward sign that says sin. And all of us carry it so often that we sometimes forget that we're holding it at all. We don't notice it anymore, because if you're carrying something all the time, you may sometimes forget that it's even there. Like, weirdly, I have the same problem with my car keys. I'll ask, where are my car keys? And Jenna will say, what's in your hand? I forget that it's there. If it happens enough, you forget. And the same thing happens with our sin, because how does it do it? While in his spirit and our own spirit hungers for him, we desire what's beyond, because what's beyond what we are now is the promise of something more. More than what we see, because what God has is glorious riches, more than we currently possess, something we hunger for. But the flesh, our weakness, our sin is consistently distracted. against desire is distraction by the quick fix. And that quick fix is very tempting because the thing about going for what's beyond what is more is that it takes, like I said with those monuments, time, resources, investment, a will to keep the shine, in a sense, to make effort to keep ourselves pointing to the one whom we reflect, and for ourselves to scream God, Jesus, the Spirit in who we are, that we might receive those glorious riches it talks about. We wouldn't get crops unless we were going to say, we can put seeds in the ground, we're going to water it, we're going to take time, we hope the weather's good, we're going to pray for good weather. To get good things takes that kind of investment. We are willing to do it with some things, but with some things we go, it's really hard to be doing without that right now. And so the temptation to the quick fix becomes all the more easy. And those quick fixes are the things that the world says are priorities. You know, should your financial goals be this? Should your time be that? And the world, just like with the monuments, is going, shouldn't you be caring about this? But then we become so defined by the world that eventually the Spirit becomes obscured. The idea of something being more and beyond becomes so obscured in our mind that we might become convinced that there cannot truly be anything more than what we see. We lose belief in the invisible because of what is visible. We're constantly distracted by only what is visible and no longer believe in the invisible. That's the power of distraction. But the more we live in the Spirit, the more we actually commit to the course and see the fruit of what God does in us, the more the flesh becomes obscured. The more the distraction is no longer appealing. No longer is the quick fix even desirable. We are now focused on our true desire, which is the more. Don't you hunger for more? Raise your hand if you hunger for more. Like, come on, let's be honest. We aren't happy with the world as it is. Literally this morning, I only just heard that now there's a war in Iran, a war in the Middle East. Come on, aren't we in desire for a world that's more than what's going on? Yeah. We're in desire for what Jesus has for us. So we are called to be monuments of God in this world against what the world has currently got going on. We are called that when people look at us, that they see God in us, and it shows in three key ways. God's presence in us, God's prescription for us, and His power through us. Let's unpack that. What does it look like for His presence to be in us? And I'm going to put it out there. If you're spending time with a child, you can answer for me. You got a child on your lap. Do you behave differently when the child is around? Yeah, absolutely right. I do too. My daughter is almost 2. If you're around a child, you do things differently. You're more conscious of their needs, or you're more conscious that they need your help more than, say, others. If you're around an older child, you're even still considering how you speak, what topics you talk about, what things you do together so that they can be part of it. It changes things. If I'm around a group of runners, I'm going to be real. I want to get out of there. I want to say sorry to Tim and to the group. But the reality is, I know for a fact that if you're among a group of runners, they're going to ask, do you want to join us? And I'm not down for that. Even when I exercise, I used to exercise, I hate to admit it now, but I used to exercise like 4 times a week, and I would always avoid cardio. I hated cardio the most. But around runners, you behave differently. You're either in for it, or you're against it, or you're kind of umming about it. If you're at a party, if you're a kind of party person, maybe you're jumping in and you want to get in the middle of it. Or you're the kind of person like me who's like, what time are we leaving? Then there's how you're different around your family. There's different how you feel in a crowd. You might feel at home in a crowd. Or you're different, potentially, when you're in the presence of a king. So if King Charles was here, I would be probably a little bit different. I'd be a little bit awestruck. I'm a bit of a fan of the king. But the thing is, when you're present amongst different people, it shows, doesn't it? Yeah. And the same is with when we're in the presence of the King. So the fact that the Spirit is present within us, He is present within us, we are always, as believers, those who've given our lives to Jesus, always in the presence of the King. And we also learn from the word that he is present everywhere, so we can't also use the excuse that I'm not a believer in Christ as a way of getting around it. But I have his presence now within me. So then shouldn't how I behave always show that I am in his presence? Wow, that's a big call. Would you say you've always honestly lived like that? I haven't. There's a truth like, if I'm present in his presence is with me, then it should change how I am on a regular basis if I care to notice that he's there. If I actually am in awe of his presence on a regular basis. That's how we show the power of his presence with his spirit within us. Then his prescription. Now, I'm going to be honest about another thing. I'm not good at going to the doctor. Are you good at going to the doctor? Don't raise your hand. I don't want you to shame me. But literally, I had one time where I'll admit, it's a horrible thing to admit, but at one point in my life, I had broken one of my wisdom teeth, and I left it in there for 2 years. Good on you for groaning. I had left it broken in there for 2 years, and I must admit, I don't even think I really realized what happened. At one point in my life, I was like, oh, that hurts, and just moved on. But I told Jenna about it one time, not too long after we got married, and she goes, you should see a dentist. And I said, nah, it's fine. I've gotten by with it this long. I'm terrible about going to the doctor, but the thing is, I know what happens if I go to the doctor. It's going to tell me what my problem is, what I'm going to need to do about it, and I'm going to have to entrust myself into his care. I wasn't so fussed about that with the dentist. Because the reality is sometimes you kind of just want to go on like the problem isn't really bothering you. But the thing is with God, like he does, we know actually if we are spending time in his presence, he will sometimes go, so what are you doing about that? I know if I saw my doctor, he would check in with me. So have you done the things that we talked about last time? It's like, yeah, let's change the subject. But we may not always enjoy that, but we do need it. Like begrudgingly, I accepted my wife's encouragement to go to the dentist. And I had to have that wisdom tooth removed. But I didn't like the idea of going under, so I had a local put in. So I was awake through the whole process. Some people can't do that. But as it turns out, I loved it. The laughing gas was really helpful. But after that, I actually warmed up to it a lot more. Like, you know what? I'm a little bit less, actually through that encouragement, I'm a little less averse going to my doctor. In the same way as I hope that the more we allow God to speak into our condition, the more we entrust his cure for us, and see how far he will care for us, the less averse we are to seeing him and being present with him. And because he is always present with us, we don't need to book an appointment. Because some people are very stressed about that, and sometimes it takes a long time to get one. But with God, there is never a need to wait. His care is constant, his cure is ready at hand, and he knows our condition better than anyone else. The best absolute doctor. So he can heal us of our wounds. But his prescription goes beyond merely wounds, because what his prescription is also the joy of riches of things that go beyond simply freedom from bad health, but going into the idea of like being abundant. Abundant in wealth, or not wealth, I won't be a prosperity preacher, but abundant in health, abundant in the joys of the things he gives. Now, there are some things that we wrestle with in God, but God does abundantly give. And that abundance does carry different views. Sometimes he does bless us with wealth. Sometimes he does bless us with health. But we know in his scripture what he tells us he will bless all believers in the spirit in joy, in love, in peace, in happiness, in the spiritual fruits that come from his spirit. Those are the fruits of faith. So his prescription is merely, like sometimes, like if we're only about trying to avoid our hurt in life, that's not enough. Come on. We can't honestly say that would be enough for you. Sometimes we would say, well, some days it would be. And I can understand that. But if we're people who really get what God sees, he'd say to me, it's not enough that I simply heal you. I want to give you more. You kind of see what I've got in store for you. Because it starts to show through his power in our lives. Like there's an example here where I was at a flexible learning hub once. I was given a desk in the office there so I could do some of my uni study. And whilst I was in that room, there was a bit of a commotion out in the yard, and a couple of teachers brought in a mother and her daughter, and they said, there's just been a fight between two of the teenage girls. We're bringing in the daughter and her mum, just sitting here to cool off. Do you mind just keeping an eye on them while we go sort out the stuff out there? Yeah, sure, don't worry about me, I'm just over here. Anyways, probably 5 minutes later, the other girl in the fight charges into the office and starts verbally abusing the girl, and her mother naturally wants to defend her daughter, so she steps up and starts yelling back and starts to get verbally abusive in return. And no one else is coming. And I thought to myself, am I literally the only person who can do something? What should I be doing? I don't know. I feel like it was something in the spirit in that moment. But I got up, I stood between them, which I was told later was a stupid move. And I just put my hands up, and the only thing I could think to say was, it's not worth it. Over and over, I just said it until eventually other people came in and helped separate. But it actually did prevent a fight, at least enough. And someone later said, like, wow, like, how were you so calm? And I'm like, I don't know if I was, but something in me just went, it was going to be okay. And I feel like that was the Spirit. You know, weirdly, our confidence in God and in the belief He puts in us that in Him all things will be well can give us a confidence against what we currently see. A confidence that goes, look, this looks like a fight's about to break out, but something in me said that it doesn't have to. So, you know, weirdly, our peace can make other people question what's going on with them. Because one thing I also know about angry people is that sometimes, even when we are angry, we want to provoke the other person to hit back. And if they don't bite, sometimes that puts an end to it. The peace of God in us can make a great deal of difference in putting an end to violence before it even begins. Then there's the other kind of power as well. The power that speaks to hurt, that speaks to pain, that speaks to the burden that we each carry. You know, God in us has healed us. We have Christ in our hearts and the Spirit with us, that the Spirit motivates us to speak the love of God to those around us because we're saying, Jesus has changed me. I am changed now that I have His Holy Spirit. And we get to speak that in different ways to people. And I have I'm big on stories today. I'm going to share another story. Because at this same flexible learning hub, I was still a student at the time. And my tutor said to me, Adam, can you speak to this young man? He's got a severe anxiety problem amongst people. And even in this building of only 8 people, he finds it too much. So I just told him my story. And at the end of my story, he said he reminded me that we already knew each other from years ago. I didn't even recognize him. But it's weird in that moment where I was able to share about what Jesus has done for me, it suddenly made his pain look so small. And suddenly love was allowed to take that space. Suddenly he was comfortable enough to be there. He actually did stay and study with us, which was brilliant. But that was the work of God. Those are just some of my own personal testimonies of how I've seen God do that in incredible power through me. Because that's not me. And then there's the exceptional. God does do the exceptional. He restores sight to the blind. He restores hearing to the deaf. He can separate the waves in the Red Sea and open a path where there is no path. Sometimes God delivers in incredible ways, in ways that we could not imagine. Because I've heard some people who said to me like, oh yeah, I was going to be homeless, but then like at the last minute, someone else had stepped in and offered me a chance and I found a place to live. Like God does work in the miraculous, doesn't He? Absolutely He does. And we see that in different places. And the key thing again for us is to realize that those miracles were not by luck or chance. We don't believe that. We believe that God is actively loving us through also the exceptional. And it brings awe to people, to us, as we see His work through us. And like that's what also should be a marker of us as a monument of God, that people can also see His exceptional power at work in and around us. So when you break it down, if we're built to be like the temple, and by the way, we are the temple. The building the temple no longer exists, but we are the temple because we house the Spirit of God. His presence is now within us. We are called to be dedicated in the same way that God was very insistent that His temple ought to be to show Him that we are a people called to live holiness over fear. We are called to be set apart rather than fear of the world. We are called to be, hope over fear. I keep reading that wrong. To be called to live hope over fear. So we live hope that his reality is greater than the reality we see. We live his holiness over the idea of becoming faded like one of those monuments. We're going, no, I am a temple of the living God. I don't want to let myself slide and stop taking care of myself in the way that God would want me to be. I'm called to be more than just a faded monument. And I'm called to harness over frailty, which means I'm called to harness his power rather than consent to eventually decaying like some monuments do. Eventually, as some statues do, they lose their arms or they lose bits and pieces. But in God, God gives us a promise, I will make you whole. In me, you shall be whole. You shall be more than whole. You shall be more than what you've ever known yourself to be. To be that kind of monument, doesn't that sound like more than just the bare minimum? Nah, that's like, if I can live a life built on hope, built on holiness, and harnessing his power according to his will in me, then that sounds like a lot more than what I currently got, mate. And I think if we're all honest, that's the truth for you and me too. So ultimately, we come to this reminder. If I'm a monument of the Lord, then I must point to far more than just me. I must point to the image that I bear. I am made in God's image. So as a monument to him, then I want God to be shown through me, because what God shows is so much grander, so much more joyful, so much more full, so much more wholesome. Because again, like when I mentioned to Jenna this morning, and I hope she doesn't mind me mentioning, when I mentioned the news about Iran this morning, Jenna actually felt downcast by the things of this world. That's how we get when we fixate on the world, because then his reality becomes obscured. But I genuinely believe that God will somehow bring his glorious purpose in our world despite what we see going on. And we do that by pointing to him so that the world could see it too. As 1 Corinthians 3:17 tells us, this is God's promise to us. If anyone destroys God's temple, God will destroy that person. For God's temple is sacred, and you together are that temple. Doesn't that feel so relieving? Yes. God's presence in me is not just God giving me a little power and that's it. It's like, no. You're now sacred to me. And that's why in his word, whenever it talks about how feverishly he wanted his temple cared for, he's also in that way saying, I want you to feverishly take care of yourself as a testimony of your belonging to me and your faith in me. And if anyone destroys you, I will not let that slide. God will stand by us. If he inhabits us, he will not forget to protect in whom he dwells. So the question for you and I is, how much am I caring for myself? How much am I dedicating myself to more than what I currently see? Am I only fixated on the visibility of this world or the invisibility of his kingdom? Am I right now focused on my desire for his spirit or the distraction of my flesh? I'm going to be real, like I'm not always perfect on this too. I really need to hear this. I know we all do. Am I more motivated by my desires, or am I constantly distracted? I recently made a commitment, like I have been bad on my phone. I've made a commitment. I don't look at my phone unless I already know what I'm going on my phone to find, and for nothing more. Intentionality. Is my life more built on hope, or is it now more motivated by fear? Am I being set aside for his holiness, or am I becoming faded? Because without his presence, we know we are feeling that fadedness coming over us. Am I harnessing and living his call, his power, or am I becoming more frail as my own strength gives way to the pressures and the burdens of this world? Tell me which ones you want to be. We all know which ones we want to be. We want to be the one in which Christ, the Spirit, dwells within and shows every quality that he has. We want to be the room that if someone looks at us, they go, that's God's room. We want to symbolize so much more. And when we fail, when we falter, let's remember the words that Paul spoke in Hebrews. But Christ is faithful over God's house as a son. He is God, the Father's son, so he cares for his Father's house. And we are his house, if indeed we hold fast our confidence and boasting in our hope. Which is another thing then, that we then do not forget to keep boasting in the cross as the source of our hope, as the reality that we want to dedicate our lives to more than the fractured and fallen one of this world. Let's pray.